I wanted to say that I saw your demo at the International Association of Pastel Societies convention probably 2 years ago, imagining. And I was blown away at, beside the figure, that I felt that you were just hanging a piece of gauze in front of a beautiful drawing. So, and I know it's not like you draw the figure and then draw like it's not like layered, it's all integrated. So my mind is like really, yeah, you have this patience to do that in your still lives too, but it gave such a mystery to your work. And I was just in awe of that ability and your patience to be able to do it, truly.
Thank you.
I did write to everybody about all the good things and, your shows, the books, all the, important, galleries and da. So I would just rather hear you talk. And I am going to send Arlene some images in the meantime. So please.
Yeah, sure, I will start.
Anywhere.
Yeah, since it's pastel oriented, the journey began probably around 2009 in a way. That's when I started to show any kind of formal works in pastel. I had been an illustrator for years, as I mentioned to you earlier. They went the way of the computer. I did not like that. Immediately, I kind of immediately gave away the computer equipment they coaxed me into buying because they offered me loads of money and I had a young family. So I still felt after the first job, which was a book cover, that and I've done so many analog, painted book covers and magazine covers, things like that, and illustrator in the 80s and 90s, that I just felt like I can't do this. It's just not art to me anymore. And so I was teaching at the time privately and teaching from drawing from life. And so I was going to France to visit some friends of my wife's, and I started to do a few small pastel paintings as gifts. And because I had grown up using pastel, the first medium I ever used was pastel. I was given a box by my father, who unwittingly pushed my artistic career, so to speak, as a businessman, not thinking it would actually be my career. He thought I would go in a different direction. But he gave me a box of pastels at the age of 8, and I used them, into little nubs, and that I brought to college with me. And every professor said, "What is that? Don't bring that to my class." And then I had done a few illustrations in pastels as well, just to kind of bring it into the forum of illustration. But people always ask, like, "Oh, it's too fragile to this." But from my own personal work, I wanted to do it. I like the tactile nature of it. After illustration died, I actually started sculpting a lot in wood with big trunks of wood with mallets and chisels and 6-foot sculptures and things like that. And I honestly felt like the pastel had the same feel to me. It was very tactile. It was touch oriented, the sensitivity of touch. It felt very sculptural in some weird way because you're pushing it around. I only use my fingers. I use stick pastel only, no pencils. I lay down a drawing and I go from there with the pastels. And like you had said, layering it. And I layer and I layer and I layer and I blend, and it deadens the color. And then I make marks on top. But the first formal painting I entered or showed anybody besides friends was, I think, 2009 was the first entry into the PSA and the Pastel Society of America. And it was met with, awarded a prize and some interest from a potential buyer even. And it was exciting, and I felt like, wow, I found a home, and I started to really dive into it. And again, unwittingly, I didn't know the history of pastel. I didn't know what papers to use, what this to use, what that to use. I still stuck close to what I had, which was an old box of Rembrandts, and I went actually to New York Central Art Supply, which is a really used to be a great art store in the New York City area, and they had a wonderful paper department. So I went up and I asked the guy a question of, I like newsprint. What is like newsprint but better quality? And he laughed and said, well, newsprint is trash. And I said, I know, but I like the texture. He goes, I know what you want. And he brought me over and showed me one paper, which was Reeves BFK. And I felt it, and it felt kind of similar, but softer. And I've kind of stuck with that paper. I've tried a few other papers that I like, but I like Reeves BFK as my paper of choice for formal paintings. And so I've been using that now since 2009 for any big works. And they are sometimes bigger works. I've worked close to 6 feet, 5 feet. Most of the works for exhibition have to be about 4 feet or under. So that's 4 feet by, say, 30 inches, 36 inches, something like that. But they're big works. So I like to use my hands. My hands are not small, and I don't want to work small anymore. I used to do book covers with paint, oil or acrylic, and they were tiny book covers, just maybe doubled in size, or maybe sometimes same size. And that was using 000 brushes, and your body gets tight and kind of cramped, and felt pastel was kind of freeing in a way, even though my work may not look freeing, just moving my arms and hands around and blending with my finger. And that's all I really use is my fingers to sort of blend my pigments. And it sort of gave me, I don't know, different opportunities, I think, to create works that were not driven by, I don't know, sort of an editor or a publisher or a art director. They were just driven by my own instincts as works of art. So I kind of liked my small trajectory in pastel because it gave me an opportunity just to be an artist again. And that was different than either teaching, which I teach a lot, as I mentioned to you, 6 days a week still for almost 30 years. And I devote 1 day a week just to myself, the full day, and that's usually Sunday. But the other days I try to log in about 6 hours of work of my own, doing on a painting, just if I have that time. I try to put in a lot of hours because I like to work and I like to paint. And so that combination allows me to have that patience you mentioned. I like to work slow and listen to music and think my paintings through. Sundays, spontaneous. It's one model posing. If I get an hour of solid drawing time, 3 20-minute poses, I'm happy. The way it's a group of artists that we gather once a week and we draw, and I monitor it. I set up the model, I set up the lights, and it's a loosely driven class. The model is an experienced model, and she takes it as she's amongst friends. So her modeling style is, let's talk a lot and let me dance around to the music during the break. And then when she gets back into pose, like I said, maybe on a lucky day, I get 80 minutes of drawing time, and that makes sometimes no difference at all. Sometimes I do a drawing in 20 minutes and I'm ecstatic, and sometimes 3 hours and I've ruined it. So with the 3 20-minute poses I get out of her. So it's that's my day, to be more spontaneous and less patient in my work. So if you have any questions about anything, please ask me. I'm open to any questions.
I do. This is Leon. You mentioned BFK paper.
Yeah, Reeves BFK. It's
And
go ahead.
I don't know what it is. I mean, is it a sanded paper or is
No,
it?
these are they're archival papers. They're hand molded papers. They're made of cotton, and it's not really a heavily buffered surface, which means it accepts the pigments very well. It's a totally different experience working in sanded papers than working the way I do, which again, I'm not here to sell you the way to work. I have many people I've met over the years through Pastel that are Pastel pencil artists, or combination of the two, stick and pastel pencil. And, they do beautiful work as well. It's just, I kind of dumbly just walked into this. I didn't really investigate things or what is in the world of pastel. I just had my tools and I used them with kind of my sensibility of painting. And since it was dry media, I just used it in a similar fashion. Sometimes I make a full underpainting that is drawn out with pastel, and it's a full underpainting in one color. Sometimes I use a Prussian blue, and then I sort of build layers upon layers of color rubbed with my finger. The difference, I think, is that the Reeves BFK will you work the pigments into the paper, literally into the paper. So I don't get a lot of dust in my work, and I know the paper's archival, and the way I mount the paper, it's also archival. I mount it to aluminum panel, and it's something that I concocted from asking a lot of people over the years and finding what are archival materials, what does that mean, how to do it the best way, what museums accept, in hopes that one day your work ends up somewhere in a museum. That's how I went about this. You could say sort of unscholarly, but I like to figure things out myself. So at the end of the day, it's not for everybody what I do. You have to be patient. You have to utilize the paper in the means that it has to give. It's a resilient paper because it's made of cotton, but it's different than traditional, or let's put it this way, contemporary traditional materials, which is a lot of sanded papers and surfaces that are have that have the roughness, and I appreciate its smoothness. And like I said, I only use my finger. So I know I've heard people say, their battle scars of rubbing a sanded paper and they've got Band-Aids on their finger. For me, this is my tool, and I protect it as much as possible. Though you can see, sorry, it's my middle finger. I messed up my finger in my avid gardening, which I've turned my backyard into pretty much a farm now. So it's not a garden any longer. It's taken over a half an acre of land. So yeah, so that's what I use. I love the BFK. It has some pitfalls, but I think for me it works. Other people have tried it and said, I don't understand how you're using this. So it's not ever a paper I would use with, say, a pencil, like a pastel pencil. It's just not hard enough. You need something to grab your materials, and it grabs pastel very well. One little side note is I did a painting a few years ago, and I had been doing a lot of paintings that year, and one was set for an exhibition. I was under a deadline to finish it for that exhibition. So I was barreling through the painting, and usually I do a lot of preliminary sketches, both black and white and color, for my own headspace to sort of know what it will look like before it's done. And I had this great idea for this still life in the foreground, and I made this beautiful fruit, and it was translucent because it was a peeled grapefruit, and the light was going through it. It was beautiful, and I painted it. But sometimes I frisk it off with a little tracing paper or something, areas in my painting, because I don't want the dust to go everywhere and ruin parts that I've already thought were somewhat finished. And it's my approach to painting. Again, it's not for everybody, but anyway, I'd frisket it off, and I'm working, feverishly to finish this. And the still life aspect turned out beautiful until I lifted back the frisket and realized the colors just were fighting the figure that was behind it. And to the beauty of that paper, I was able to lift back that completed still life back down to the paper. There was just a barely like a ghost image of it. And then I decided on a different image to put there with the figure that worked better coloristically. So sometimes hindsight, sketches are important, like for me anyway, they are. Like, if I'm Sunday morning and I'm painting a figure from life, I am not spontaneous. I mean, I'm everything but sort of clear-headed about what's the finality of it. I'm totally spontaneous, and if I get a good result, I'm happy, and if I don't, then I've learned a lesson by it. So different sensibilities for working in my formal paintings, and I call them formal paintings and I call the others drawings. They could both be great works at some point, but they're different mind spaces, you know. One is more Zen-like and one is more like you're on the dance floor, you know. So
Brian, would you like me to share your images now?
really,
And maybe you could speak on them?
sure.
You let me try and do that for you.
Okay, so I'm actually looking at that painting in real life at the at the same time of viewing the image. It's in my dining room where I'm sitting after dinner. This was a painting I did in hopes of going to the first time or the second time I was going to exhibit in China. And that painting, I realized about halfway through, because information filtered in slow back then from China about the exhibition. And I realized it is way too large for this exhibition because there was limitations. They were shipping over from the PSA a group exhibition of artists, and they had limitations on shipping sizes. And so I said, oh boy, that's too bad. I really love the painting. It was a painting I had done of a model I had used many times, and it was a veiled figure, which you're understanding, but it wasn't about her. It was about a friend of my wife's who I was also very close to, who was suffering depression. And so you know, speaking to her or going out with her as a couple, two couples went out and we'd go to dinner, and sometimes she would just go off into the bathroom and have a breakdown and just get deep, dark into it. And that mindset really stuck with me for years. And her words to describe it, of being, you know, sort of swallowed up by this and weighed down. And I do have a penchant for rocks. I love their history, their weight, their form, their texture. And I thought it was the perfect foil to kind of describe as a offset, as a still life, just this sort of weighted presence aside of the figure, and her looking up towards the light, but being almost bound by the veil and not able to sort of I don't know, get through her depression. And you know, she struggled for years now with it, and going on 30 years that I've known her. And that was kind of the inspiration for the piece, you know, besides having a model whose forms mingled with the veil, you know, and sort of how the light was catching it. You know, it's all natural light I use. I don't like using artificial light when I drape the figures like this. And I love how the ripples and wrinkles of the veil sort of I don't know, sort of add some mystery or narrative to the figure. It also allows me to be less tight and maybe a little bit more experimental with shapes and space. So this painting, incidentally, was the one of the few years that Salman Gundi hosted the IAPS. I think the only year, maybe. IAPS once had their exhibition there in New York, and it won the Founders Award. This painting, it's called Deep.
Impressive.
Thank you. This painting, which is, in my view, is a little cropped, but let's see. There's a tabletop below it. So if that's composition, I don't know if it's just my view. I can't really tell. But anyway, again, it was a veiled figure behind a series of still lives. This girl was not only modeling for me, but she had been a past student. She also was a aspiring model. Besides being an artist, she is now an artist, but she went through years of being solicited to model, you know, and photographically, what have you. But she won some modeling contests, got very involved when she was younger in modeling, and she was constantly, even though she is a tiny, thin person, was constantly thinking about her weight, her appearance, her facade, and I kind of thought the beauty of the gourds with their bulbous shapes were kind of something that speaks to a lot of concerns nowadays about body image. And I don't know if that came across to anyone in the painting that I made, but that's what it was about. Her concerns and the world's concerns about that, and what is beauty and what is not beauty. I find the gourds equally beautiful in their own way because they're not a person, obviously, but they have their own beauty and form, and as do people of every shape. And she was very concerned about that. Modeling companies telling them don't eat, and you look a little heavy today when she weighs under 100 pounds. It's, things like that I found absurd. So I thought it was a good intention for a painting. Whether it came across or not, I don't know.
What is the title?
Boy, you've got me on the worst night of my life here for memory. Forms.
No, oh, wow, yeah. Because that story people could really connect with.
Yeah, I think so. I don't try to make it too overt. I mean, I let people draw their own conclusions. A lot of people say, "Oh, the veil adds all this mystery," but I'm pretty clear cut about what I would like to say in it. But I just, don't want to say it too loudly, I guess.
Wow. Oh, I am loving you talking about, and I'm getting a lot of more meaning to appreciate your work even more than the physical beauty that I see. So
Thank you.
I'm enjoying this.
Thank you very much.
Another question. That's the BFK archival paper.
Mhm.
Does it come? Is it a neutral color or a mid-tone, or is it?
They have only a few shades of color, which are kind of, like you said, neutrals. There's a gray and a sort of a yellowish buff color, and then they have sort of an off-white. These are the mold-made papers. They also sell rolls of bright white. That paper, though, being in a roll, and I bought it simply because I could make extremely large paintings, 5 by 8 feet by 5 by 6 feet. And I bought the roll years ago, and I did a few paintings that way. But that roll, maybe it's because it is on a roll and it's not mold made, is buffered. Buffered means it's kind of like starch on a shirt, and it makes the paper a little stiffer, and I found it less accepting of the pastel. It sat on the surface a little bit more than the mold made, which is very soft, and you can feel the fibers of the paper in a soft way. And I like how it accepts the pastel. It just really lets you work it into the paper. So when I was in college, I was seeing this girl, and she brought me to her father's apartment, who was a pretty well-known product designer. He had designed the Brut bottle, if anyone remembers the Brut cologne, and many other things. He was a well-known product designer in the city. He lived above Tiffany's, maybe 6 or 7 floors above, and he had a whole floor on that building that was complete hallways, and they were filled with many drawings, paintings, and many of the drawings were pastels. And when I looked at the bottom of the frame, I noticed all the pastel dust in a lot of them. And the subway runs under there, so it always stuck in the back of my mind about like pastel dust, how vibration, sound can sort of like wiggle it off the surface. You can imagine you're putting dry powder on top of a surface. What's holding it there? Not a lot. So I found, for me, Reeves working it into the paper made physical sense. As I told you, I kind of took it from my painting experience, and I thought, there's adherence when you're talking about oil or acrylic to the paper or to the canvas in that case. But in terms of pastel, there's very little holding it on there, and limited vibration can make it sit at the base of the frame pretty easily. So I liked the way it worked itself into the Reeves, and that's why I use it. There's some other papers that are archival, but they are smooth and soft, and a lot of people go, well, that's not like a piece of pastel mat, and it's not. So I teach a lot of adults in pastel now at the local school I teach at, and sometimes they come in pastel mat or different canson papers and mitientes and things like that. They all have their own unique texture, and I think for an artist, you have to find what works for you. Many painters now or pastel painters are using canvas. So there's many options out there. It's just find what makes sense to you, and then keep working till it sort of clicks, or till you see the result that you had in your mind at the beginning. I don't think there's one magic bullet, in other words, including Reeves. I like it.
Do you, on these works, which are figurative and still life, are you working from life with the model and with the whole environment?
Well, the painting you're showing right now, which is behind me, Tide, that was painted entirely from life, because nothing on there will wilt, die, or sort of change. And the veil paintings, unfortunately, due to both finances and my studio size, I have to do both. Now the still life of the gourds was painted by life, but the model, she came and she went, and I did maybe 3 sessions with her, and the rest I had to utilize my photography. So I shoot some photos. A lot of things are embellished, meaning that once you get into the rhythm of how the veil is moving or how light is moving on the veil's wrinkles or folds, I kind of like let my instincts take over a bit. So I don't follow 100% of anything. Unless when I work from life, I tend to like 100% from life. I just tend to follow it. Meaning the gourds, I didn't embellish. I just painted what I saw. And with most of the still lifes, if I can get away with that, the very first painting I entered in PSA was a group of these Saturn peaches, which I think most people are familiar with. They have that weird flat-ish shape. And I set them on some rocks, and I started painting, and not knowing what I'm going to do with this painting even. It was my first sort of jumping into pastel painting as a formal medium. And I started doing in my studio. And of course, one of the peaches started going after about 2.5 days, And so I'm at the local grocer, and I brought my rotten peach with me, and I'm trying to pick another peach that fits. And everyone's kind of, looking over like, what's this guy holding a bad peach and trying to find a replicate peach? But that's sometimes what you do. And, if you wanted to maintain what you've started, if you have the ability to just change it, then change it. But for me, I get very hung up on things like details, and I would go and look for peaches till the sun came down, until I found the one that fit, and that painting was the first thing I entered in any kind of exhibitions for pastel.
And do you mount them? You were talking about mounting them. You mount them. Do you mount the paper before?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a couple of things. The first exhibition in China that my work was sent as part of a group from PSA, it came back torn. And that was a single sheet of Reeves. And I would just tack it to some museum quality foam core. It's black foam core, and just tape the edges, put a thumbtack in, cover it with tape, and it's set. And they were freely mounted, and then it was a good framer could handle it. It came back with a small tear. I wasn't incredibly upset, but I kind of realized at that point that I needed to figure something out. So I had an exhibition coming up of one of those life drawings that I had sent you. And I said, oh, I love that drawing, and I'm going to mount it. And I tried to do a little research, and I asked some people at some store, like art stores in the city, and a couple of people made some recommendations. And I had been using a an old piece of Fabriano at that point of like Ang paper for a life drawing. And it was charcoal and pastel with minimal treatment on the surface. And I tried to mount it, and it was a finished drawing. And I mounted it on a piece of aluminum panel, which I heard is archival to it doesn't warp and doesn't this and it doesn't that. So I used it, and I used PVA glue, which is an archival glue. And I brushed it on very thinly and did everything that I thought would be right after doing my own level of research. And it started to wrinkle on the surface. And I literally just threw it across the room. It stuck into the sheetrock, and my wife, I heard her tires screech as she left the driveway because she knew I was in a fit of rage. Said I loved that drawing. It was a small drawing, but it stuck with me. And after that, I put my mind to figuring it out. And Reeves is a lot more accepting, being a thicker paper than a sheet of Fabriano Ang paper, of mounting. So I brush on a PVA glue that's thinned down, and it's a two-man process if you're doing a piece that's, say, 48 by 36, and that other man is always my wife, and she begrudgingly holds up the paper. I brush feverishly. She lowers it at my request slowly. I burnish it down. I lay sort of plywood on top of it, like birch plywood, overnight, and it seals it. So it is one piece of what I consider, or, based on my research, archivally mounted archival paper. And so that's how I've been making my substrates for many years now, just because it completely eradicates someone tearing it, number one. Someone can still destroy your painting, but I've had pretty good luck with it. And it makes my job of framing a lot easier too. If I'm going to frame something myself, I could get a frame and pop it right into the rabbit and put a piece of, some Optium or some kind of acrylic in front of it. And it's very protected and sturdy, actually. So I've been doing that now for about, let's say, maybe 6 years, 6 or 7 years, mounting my own papers. It's a process, and the wise choice is never try to mount a painting that is done or a drawing that is done, because that's what you don't want to do, because in case there's a glitch, if I haven't made many mistakes over the years, except for that first one, and that still haunts me because it's still one of my favorite figurative works. So, that I did spontaneously in about an hour, but I love the drawing and it still haunts me. I still kept it, it's warped from being flung across the room. It's wrinkled from my bad mounting, but it's a good lesson to learn. And I like to face those lessons that you fail upon,
So are you saying you mount the paper before you paint on it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Because in case you're going to make the mistake I had done early on, that was only a drawing, but a drawing can be as important as a painting. It's your feelings towards it as the artist. And I felt that was one of the best drawings I had done. Not to that point, but maybe ever. You never know. And so I really had a high hopes for the painting. I kind of rushed feverishly to mount it, and that was my mistake. So yeah, these are a series of both paintings and drawings. And that painting is called Veil, that's on the screen now. It was kind of the culmination of people's interest, I guess, in the Veil paintings. And I wanted something that was big and explanatory about my feelings about this, which is, the Veil is really just a diaphanous barrier to the figure, and I like how it plays with the light and with the forms and creates levels of space. And that was my motivation for using it to begin with. And this painting, the figure is larger than life. So it may be my favorite formal painting, both coloristically and just the scale of it. I just love I love the painting for my own, for my own enjoyment. I like that the face is obscured. I like that the forms are bigger than life. And I wish I had options to paint even larger. And I probably do. It's just finding the perfect paper, which Reeves does not have, to go even larger unless I go on a more buffered piece. So I like that softness that it allows me. So. And I believe that painting won I think the Art Spirit Award at PSA. I can't remember the exact year, but it was it was a nice award to win, and it just, I think it captured a lot of things that I'm interested in terms of breaking up the figure a little bit. I get too hell-bent on detail sometimes. I love still life. I love the narrative of it, that you can use objects as symbols, and I always will love it, and I still love it. It's just, I did one veil painting, and people said, oh, when I went to IAPS, they walk over, oh, you're the veil guy. And I said, it's great to be typecast, I like to do everything, I still like to sculpt. And so sometimes the typecasting thing is not in your favor, but I do still love still life as a genre. It has a lot to say. It's just, maybe it's in my methodology or the way I draw, it doesn't eke out the same, I don't know, sort of interest. That painting was Unity. Again, it was a series of objects that I chose. It also has an interesting story to a degree. My father was going through some illnesses, which resulted in a inopportune surgery, which ended in his passing. And I was in the middle of painting this because there was a lot of conflict between my 5 siblings. So my 2 brothers are in the box. My 2 sisters are on the outside of the box, and I'm sitting on top. And we had lots of conflicts about should my father have this surgery? Should he not have this surgery? Nothing was determined, but he was being pushed pretty hard by a surgeon to, don't you want to live longer, kind of thing. And so I was working on the painting and was going to finish it, but I had to make a lot of trips from New Jersey to Massachusetts to visit him while he was either in the hospital or at the end in hospice. And so I never finished the painting for that year's exhibition. So quickly I did a figure, maybe all in 10 days, and I submitted that instead that year. It was kind of still a formal painting. There was a small still life in front of it, but it didn't win any award. And the following year, or after that show was over, I continued on this painting because it had meaning to me, and it meant a lot. And in the time frame that not only he was going through, but then in his ultimate passing. And so I submitted it the following year, and it won the Founders Award. Unbeknownst to PSA or anyone else, that story was never told until well after the painting was submitted and awarded. So that was kind of very private at the time, and probably wouldn't make sense to people, like there was some gestural things with the gourds that made sense to me, but to others, maybe it's like, what the hell is this guy talking about? So, I like natural objects. I love their textures and colors and things. And somehow the gestural aspects, the box symbolizing a home, kind of was why I composed it that way, I don't know what more to say about it, but it was a happy situation that I held off from rushing it and trying to finish it for an exhibition versus, going to see my father more rather than less. Some of the days I was traveling, 6 hours to be back for class. That means I'd, wake up 6 a.m. to drive to Massachusetts, visit my dad for an hour and a half in the hospital, and then shoot back to New Jersey and then teach 3 hours. So those were some long days, but ultimately I'm happy that I was there. And also I'm happy that I took my time with the painting because maybe it made it a much deeper painting.
Brian, you said you work with natural light? Do you have a box that you set your still lifes in front of a window, or do you have north light, or?
Yeah, I mean, mostly for the figures, I prefer natural light. I don't like the way it works. This painting was done with a bulb light, but I do set my paintings in, or still life sometimes, in boxes, or I'll flag the light, or I'll put different fabrics to sort of make it appear there's more depth. All different scenarios with the still life that will work. I wanted the warmth of the color, so sometimes artificial light is going to give you that. So yeah, in the still lives, I don't really make a hard line on what I'm using in terms of light. Sometimes it's easier to direct the light, particularly in a window. I do things with the window light to kind of screen it or shim it or flag it to sort of make it direct itself where I want it to go. But it's a lot easier with a bulb if I'm doing a still life. This was a large painting, so again, I like that aspect to sort of take sort of simple objects and sort of like explode them in scale, because it gives them importance. And I think people, lots of times things are overlooked in nature, their beauty, their symmetry. And in this case, maybe their meaning, that's more private, the meaning, but I still think they have uses for symbolism, objects. And so I always try to use something like that as a telling kind of point to the story if someone's interested to hear. I don't always write it down. Sometimes the titles maybe don't even speak to it unless you understand what I'm talking about. But these are just my whimsy, I guess. And this one, it was named Tide. It's I found this sort of, I'm not sure what the use of it is, but I found a bunch of these. Like I said, being a gardener, I'm digging constantly, and I found these very circular pieces of marble that were obviously made into little circles, a little smaller than a golf ball. I don't know what their uses were, but I've found about 10 of them over the years, and they seem pretty old. My house was built in the 1860s, and again, not knowing what they are exactly, and sometimes they're weathering on them, I felt in this case, putting pieces of the ocean in a box and having the moon sitting on top of it spoke to the sort of the tides and how it affects everything. It affects us. It affects the ocean. It affects the world at large. So that's what this was about. That's why it was called that. I'm a big proponent of sort of environmental issues, and I think this was my way of speaking to that to a degree. I didn't want to speak to the pollution or the degradation of the ocean, but I wanted to speak to how important things are that we maybe overlook, like how the moon affects the tides and how the tides affect everything in terms globally, the oceans, how we live, how we eat, how we survive. So that's what this painting was about. And I couldn't help but fall in love with the details of a sea urchin or a horseshoe crab, which I collected myself as well. All of the things in the paintings I've collected. I have never purchased any of them. I just collect them or grow them. And that's part of the fascination as well, to paint them. Yeah, that's Bobby. I mentioned earlier she's a model in her 70s, late 70s, mid 70s. She's modeled for many famous artists. I mentioned Philip Pearlstein and Daniel Green, Bert Silverman, Ellen Eagle. The list goes on, but she's a local model, and she is holding up the school that I teach at from a modeling standpoint. She even gives model workshops. She always has little gestures that she puts into her feet, her hands, her eyes, and she's a wonderful model, and I draw her every Sunday. And they're always drawn on toned papers. This is on a Saint Armand paper. It's a Montreal paper company. I think they've recently either gone under or sold, but they're made of rags. The papers, they're handmade, and I just go in and I draw for myself for 3 hours. But like I said, about 80 minutes, 60 minutes of drawing time, sometimes 20 minutes if I do a quick study. And it's all for me. They recently made a movie about her life, and I believe they told me the title earlier because my memory is pretty bad tonight. I think it was a figure model's life, outside in. I can't remember. I'll try to have the person who so helpfully told me the title. And I'm a
Out-
big, go ahead.
Outside in Life of a Figure Model.
There you go. And it's won a lot of awards now. She's sent it out to many independent film festivals, and it's just really a story of Bobby's life. And she's had a lot of joy and a lot of tragedy in her life, and she wears it when she models. Her age gives me history. Her gesture is just, the forms she has in the movie. I mean, they interviewed me extensively about why I want to draw this woman every Sunday. It's because her body and face tells everything. It tells the story of her life, and it's always a joy to draw her. She cares about modeling, and I think it's a rare movie that kind of explains the person you're looking at, not the thing you're looking at, because sometimes people will treat a model as if she's a pear or a still life, and they're living, and you have to give them feedback, and they have to give you feedback. So her ability to sort of help the artist, I think, is what makes her a really great model. She understands what she looks like to the artist, not what she looks like to herself. She doesn't care about that. And that's really rare. And the story is rare because I think someone should have made a movie years ago about the life of a figure model, because it's something we just don't think about. We just walk in, someone's posing, and they go their merry way. And then she has had a life. She doesn't bring it up in class, but she wears it. And I think it's important for artists to sort of dredge that out of the model, like what's going on with her. What is she thinking about? So I really, this is my joy to draw from life on Sundays.
I
It's
think
spontaneous. So,
I think you're fortunate. She carries herself well.
yes, yeah, yeah. Like I said, she really always makes mention of that. Many models come in and they think about what do they look like when they're posing, and she cares like, what is the artist seeing when I'm posing? And that's a big difference, and it really shows on the way she models, I believe. She even understands how light might be hitting parts of her body, so that's really rare, I think. And these are, like I said, they're very quick. I do a quick charcoal drawing, vine, then vine charcoal. Then I quickly do a little hatching with some charcoal pencils, and then pending the paper and pending, because I use a variety of papers every Sunday. I just try new things. I buy new things. I buy things that aren't made anymore and in warehouses and use those. And I don't have a preset notion or a preset palette even. And the paper dictates the palette, because when you're working on toned or colored paper, if you choose a certain color, it can seem too hot or too cold. So it really is a little bit challenging. And that challenge sometimes results in complete failure. And that's a good thing to learn. So it's not always you go home feeling great. And sometimes you get something that you're somewhat satisfied with or very satisfied with. And that's a great feeling. So
Are
a
you
lot of,
still using Rembrandts, or do you use the
I
others?
I do use some of the others, but I do like Rembrandts. Maybe I'm just very traditional and or sort of nostalgic about that little box that I still have. But I buy even old Rembrandts online. I buy some old Grumbacher paint, pastels online. I use some Giro and I use some Sennelier, sometimes Schmink, but very minimally. Those are like final marks at best. And I do like Rembrandt because it has a little it's soft pastel. It's not extra soft pastel. And extra soft pastel sits on the surface. And I don't find that I have the capability to use it sensitively that way. So I find that Rembrandt allows me to use my sensitivities better with that brand. And I think Grumbacher is a close proximity. And Giro is the only thing I don't like about Giro is that they have the size of the sticks for my hands is a little small. And so I feel like I'm holding a #2 pencil. And I like to flatten an edge of my pastel and then sort of scrape it across the surface, particularly on these type of drawings. The bigger drawings as well, but I'm layering with that and blending with my fingers. So final mark, sometimes I do use a softer pastel or something with more vibrancy. You know, I just think Rembrandt has a lot of capabilities for my work. I mean, there's many great brands. You know, people bring to my classes an array of pastels that you'd be hard pressed to find. You know, in one art store, they've purchased so many things. And I always say, any of these paintings, the painting I'm looking at now, Dream, it was done with a handful of colors. Literally, it may look like, wow, you must have used this, that, and that. The melons, I did use an abundance of old Grumbachers because the colors were just perfectly vibrant. Whereas for the figure, I'm maybe in totality I used, and that's including areas that are background or foreground, and the figure itself, maybe I used, I don't know, 10 or 11 colors, you know, just by layering. So I don't use an abundance. I don't put out an array of pastels and start picking through those pieces. I have a handful, and I work one hand is for holding them and the other hand is for using them. And that's how I kind of work. Again, it's not the textbook of pastel, how I use it. It's just all self-made. You know, I didn't have background in it. And so I kind of just went about teaching it, and you know, to younger students, and doing it with no history or knowledge. I just kind of, you know, figured it out for myself. Yeah.
Brian, I have this very naive question because I've done figures for years, but are you drawing the figure and then drawing the gauze on top? Or
Well,
are you like,
wouldn't be the first person that asked, just to make you feel better. I mean, the first time I put a veil painting at the PSA, at the National Arts Club, I think I was asked that 3 times that evening at the exhibition. And no, it's done, I don't know if I want to say simultaneously. It's done as I'm seeing through the veil to the color that's emerged based on the figure. So it's done that way. It's done kind of at once. It's not done in layers to the point like, oh, first I paint a figure, then I paint a veil. No, it's all in totality because it's one painting. So that's how I think of it.
Are you saying that the figure is actually veiled?
Well, the paintings are of a veiled figure, but the painting itself, I mean, the actual real, in other words, the image is a veiled figure.
Yeah.
The painting itself is a flat piece of paper. I even was asked that, did you wrinkle the paper and then do the painting? No, it's a flat sheet of paper with a painting on top of it. And the painting happens to be of the veiled figure. And so if I see the background colors, which might be towards a tendency towards greens, and then it's transitioning into colors that are fleshier, those fleshier colors are still sort of tainted by the veil, or still touched by the veil colors. How the color is being seen, or how the parts of the paintings are being seen, is as one. I don't see it as separate things. That's why I try to separate the veil and the figure from the still life, to give that kind of context and space, so that one thing is in the foreground and one thing is kind of in the mid-range or background. And so they're as one. The figure and the veil are as one, and they are painted so.
If I'm understanding correctly, does the actual figure that you're drawing have a veil on it?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not good of a magician. So
Okay, all right.
yes, in other words, I drape the figures, and like I said, certain times I can have someone come back multiple times because I keep the veil in place. They could walk behind that veil, and it can be a sort of a stationary or almost still life element that I happen to be able to look through. And sometimes it's draped on the figure, and that's a little bit sometimes of me using both sketches and photography, but also me embellishing a bit. I have to sort of be able to understand the movement of light and the movement of fabric and how that affects the colors and affects the figure. And I give credit to painting and drawing as much from life as humanly possible. For instance, I mean, as I said, I teach 6 days a week. That's from life. I'm not drawing from photographs 6 days a week. When I was an illustrator, sometimes I was relegated due to the subject matter. Like, hey, you have a painting to do of Francois Mitterrand, and he's the president of France, and we're not sending you to France. So when I did that Time magazine cover of his portrait, I was handed a folder of 30 photos, all very poorly taken photos of, sort of press conferences. And they said, now make it look like you're there painting him. And that was challenging stuff, but I was relegated to only photographic materials. So I sort of used my knowledge from drawing from life to sort of make more possibilities for any paintings I want to do back then. And I still use that mentality today. Like, there is a sensibility that you look at things long enough, including like a setup or a model behind a veil. You make some notations, some sketches. Then maybe I do an underpainting and the model comes back and I look at that and I make some notation and some more sketches or some even just written words. And then I say, in this area, maybe I can just, I hate to say fake it, but I'm faking reality, because I don't have the luxury of hiring a figure model to say, hey, why don't you sleep here for the next week? Because I don't want you to move the veil. So I have to have some, reality to the situation that I'm trying to get across in a very real context of a painting. So I make some educated guesses as what things would look like. And sometimes it's relegated to the help of a photograph of the model. And sometimes it's relegated to the help of the notations that I write down or draw down. Even color. Sometimes I'm making, color sketches just to say, oh, under the light, because photographs are never going to give you what reality gives you. It's just not possible. I don't care who the photographer is or what camera you buy or what film or who processes it. It's not the same. There's a subtle difference or a vast difference of what our eyes can read when it's set up in front of you when we're drawing from life. So I really try to use that part of my sensibilities in every painting, and sometimes, like I said, I set up a melon and I go get 3 more melons and cut them perfectly so it looks just the same, and maybe I add a seed or two because I think it's void in that area and the melon didn't give me what I wanted. But I do try to work from life on a lot of those still lives, if all of the still lives actually, even when it's something as sort of not permanent like a melon. I still try to make it a permanent object in my painting.
Well, Brian, I have to say, I'm blown away by the still life and figure, but more than everything is you explaining what you're doing and the beautiful light. Light is everything. And the light is, I'm just kind of just mesmerized.
Thank you.
I have to say we're at the 9 o'clock hour. And so if there are any other questions you might want to ask, we can take a few more minutes. It's 10 o'clock in Brian's time. in Eastern time. Anyone have any other quick questions to ask them?
What are you working on now that makes you excited to paint? Your still lives or your garden or?
Well, I'm a little behind on planting my rest of my farm, so I'm a
I
little
think we
behind.
all are.
Because I was working on a painting to submit to the Pastel Society of America's exhibition, Enduring Brilliance, and so I was just finishing it up this past week. So I beyond that, I'm not thinking too far ahead. I submitted some drawing to apps, and it's the first time I did a floating mount of my drawing by myself instead of going to a framer, because just I wanted to try it, and also just economics and time, and so I tried to do that. So that was a undertaking. Makes you appreciate your framer more.
Yes.
To do it yourself. And yeah, beyond that, I have one painting can lead to a few. In other words, like I did something, I don't want to say vastly different, it's a veiled figure, but I just tried a different approach, and I'm trying to take that element to my work and see how far I can go with it. I don't think anything's set in stone with my work. So I'm probably going to start another wood sculpture soon. So I just cut down a big part of my 100-year-old pear tree, and I've been waiting for the wood to sort of get seasoned a bit more before I start hacking away at it. But yeah, I'll do some more drawings on Sundays religiously, as I said, and I will start some new paintings and maybe a new sculpture, and then garden my way through the summer. That's about, and then teach again 6 days a week. So, and sometimes it's in a late night forum, and sometimes it's in an early morning forum. So my schedule is all over the place. So I'm glad I was able to make this work for you all.
Well, I really, I'm really glad that you came. I feel a more personal touch and interaction in this kind of scenario than a demo at a big convention. And
Yeah.
The thoughts you have behind your work are just really beautiful. And it's so nice, more than people that just do a interpretation of what they see in front of them. You have so many more layers. And I didn't realize how important your hands are in the pastel, in the carving, in the planting. I mean, your hands are really everything, and you express so much in all these different scenarios. So I want to really thank you.
Oh,
It's
thank you, Sandra. Appreciate it.
And I want to thank everybody for coming, and for Leon for taping, and Darlene for monitoring in the beginning, and for being able to share your screen. And hopefully we'll see when this might get edited, and to see it on the Pastel Society of America website. So thank you all. Thanks, Brian. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Brian, thank
Have a
you.
good
That
night.